Welcome, everyone. My name is Jess Posner. My pronouns are she and they, and I am the director of the Virtual Y at YMCA of Central New York. Though we are coming to you virtually and accessible to anyone with access to the internet, the YMCA of Central New York does exist as 8 physical branches and 3 camps located in and around Onondaga County in New York State, which stands upon the unceded traditional ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee Indigenous peoples. At the suggestion of one of our guests tonight, Sora Arie, I'm going to also offer a verbal description of my image. I am a tall, larger-bodied, queer white woman of mixed European and Jewish heritage who lives with chronic illness. I am wearing a glamorous, asymmetrical haircut, round glasses, funky jewelry, and a teal-colored dress. The background behind me is a full bookshelf and some happy plants, including a just flowering purple orchid. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to the second event in our month-long virtual speaker series celebrating Pride here in Central New York. This series, Why Pride 2021, celebrating LGBTQIA+ activists and organizers of Central New York, takes place every Monday in June from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom. Tonight's program is titled Queering Disability Justice and features 2 incredible speakers, Sora Arie, also known as Sora Soul, and Katie Tastrom, who will speak together about their respective advocacy work and relevant experiences. I have learned so much from both Katie and Sora over the years as members of the queer, advocacy, and creative communities here in Syracuse, as well as online, and I'm honored to host both of them here tonight. This event is one of many events for the YMCA of Central New York that we are offering to celebrate Pride Month. Because the YMCA is here for all, including our LGBTQIA+ community and all of the marginalized identities who intersect therein. To learn more about all of our Pride programs, please visit the Y's website. And I'm going to go ahead and post right here in the chat for everybody a link to the blog post that has all of our programming. Or contact me at virtual@ymcacny.org. I'm going to put that in the chat for you too. All of the virtual programming is free and open to all, so please go ahead and share widely. Everything we do here at the YMCA is based on the ideal that everyone should have the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation or identity, diverse abilities, age, religion, socioeconomic status, and any other statuses or identities. Our work is focused on eliminating barriers to access, eliminating disparities in health, providing educational support, supporting working families, and growing our next generation of changemakers for our country. We must ensure that all people across all dimensions of diversity feel welcome and valued as part of the Y family. If you'd like to join us on this journey, please reach out and talk to me about becoming a member. We support membership for all, which includes financial assistance for those that need it. And to those of you that are already members of the Y family, we are so happy to have you with us. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to remind everyone to please remain muted throughout the event to help facilitate a pleasant audiovisual experience for all. I'll be spotlighting our speakers this evening. To turn this function on, please set your view to presenter. That button is in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom window. You'll also notice that the meeting is being recorded. Any publicly shared version of this video will only include the feeds from myself and also our speakers. I also want to acknowledge that despite our best efforts at trying to problem solve a little audiovisual technical difficulties, Katie is coming to us from the West Coast today, and there's a little bit of an audiovisual lag. I think it's going to be okay, but if we do need to slow down at any point, please just let us know. I will also be monitoring the chat during the entire event, so please use that liberally. I will be collecting those questions to facilitate a question and answer following Katie and Sora's presentation, but if there is something that's urgent, I'll be able to interrupt as necessary. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to now introduce our speakers tonight. I'm going to go ahead and highlight them. So Sora and Katie, if you would turn your video on. Thank you. Okay, so you should see myself and Katie and Sora spotlight for you if you have your presenter view turned on right now. Welcome, Sora and Katie. I'm going to just offer a very brief intro to both of them, but they will both introduce themselves in greater detail as part of the presentation in a few minutes. Sora Erie, whose pronouns are she, her, and they, them, is a professional circus artist, disability justice activist, and writer who reaches for a world where access is understood as an act of love and respect for all humankind. Her activism is fueled by her many identities: Japanese American, disabled, disfigured, neurodivergent, and queer. Find her on Instagram as @MissSoraSoul. Katie Tastrom is a writer and speaker, among other things. She focuses on disability justice, sex, and abolition. Her writing has been all over the internet, including Slate, Truth Out, and NBC News. Learn more about her at katietastrom.com. And now, the virtual stage is yours, Sora and Katie. I'm going to unhighlight myself and turn it over to you.
Hooray! Hello, everyone.
Sorry, Sora, I accidentally unmuted you. I meant to do it to myself. Sorry about that.
Let me do that again. Hello. I am really honored to be in this space. I cannot tell you how much it means to be sharing this space with both Katie, who I have met just recently, and I'm so excited to hear more about your work, Katie, and just with all of you. It is such a pleasure to be here. Katie, do you want to say anything before we kick things off?
No, I just want to agree that I'm excited to be here and talk about this stuff. And yeah, Sora, I'll let you get started, and then I'll take it from there.
Perfect. Okay. For visual access, for those who need it, I am a smallish Japanese woman. I have a swoop of hair in front that my friend has told me makes me look like a friendly comma. I am wearing purple lipstick and a little black jacket that's kind of military-esque, I guess, with little brass buttons. And I am sitting in a dark room. I guess it looks kind of hackerish, but there are like some dark paintings behind me, and I'm sitting in front of a window that's giving me light on my face. The sides of my head are shaved, and I have a facial disfigurement on the left side. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And forgive me because this is my very first time in my entire life I have ever used PowerPoint. So bear with me. Okay, here we go. So, like I mentioned, during our time together, Katie and I will be trading off talking about various facets of disability justice. I want to share with all of you a little bit about disability justice and why it is that I am so in love with it. The framework of this movement was created in 2005 by queer disabled people of color, Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, and Leroy F. Moore, and Eli Clare and Sebastian Margaret, who are all part of the Sins Invalid Performance Art Collective. And they did this as a response to being excluded from the mainstream disability rights movement and disability studies discourse. And I am so sorry. Something just glitched. I'm so sorry about that. All right. Disability justice centers the voices of those who are most impacted by systems of oppression. It is led by sick and disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC. It is led by sick and disabled immigrants, sick and disabled people who are houseless or incarcerated, or who have had their ancestral lands stolen, or a combination of any of the above. I love this movement because instead of leaning on the words of outsider, non-disabled caretakers, lawmakers, parents, teachers, and doctors who often speak over us, it amplifies the experiential wisdom of those who are living in intersectional disabled body minds. It is a movement that demands our perceptions to shift, to ditch the dominant narratives that disability can only be tragic or inspirational or scary, and to Instead, view every human as completely whole, regardless of how little or much they can participate in this capitalist society. It is a radical movement, and it is absolutely brilliant. I want to share a little bit about me and my life up until this moment. I was born with a rare facial disfigurement of unknown causes. My experience of childhood and young adulthood was one that embodied reaching for some semblance of normal. And because internet didn't exist for the first half of my childhood, and also I grew up in this really small Arizona town, I was fairly isolated in many ways, but mostly revolving around being one of the few Japanese American families in the city, and also being one of a total of 2 kids with facial disfigurements. Back then, we didn't know that having a physical difference counted as having a disability. And even if we had, I probably wouldn't have embraced it. And this is because our society has trained us to think that disability is a bad word. Spoiler alert, it's not. Historically, and especially amongst communities of faith, people have been taught that what we're experiencing is because we are being punished for something either that we did or that our families did to deserve it, and that our body minds are something to be cured. In childhood, there was this one time where I got to experience this firsthand. I was in Long John Silver's with my family, and this woman walked up to our table and started praying over me and asking God to free me from my suffering by healing my face. It was pretty horrific and instilled a great deal of shame into me. The field of medicine also looks at our body minds through the lens of problems that need to be fixed. Thankfully, these days, I am so grateful for this. The social model of disability has emerged, and it's a model that is based in civil rights. And it tells us that the experience of being disabled is less about the limitations of our body minds and more about societal attitudes and the reluctance to create access. In short, there is nothing wrong with us. This is actually an indictment of society for shutting us out. And now, with disabled Americans making up 26, more than a quarter of the population, we really need to start talking about shifting attitudes and breaking down these systems of oppression. I am 38 years old, and it has only been in the last year that I've started identifying proudly as disabled. And I do so because it is so much a part of who I am. And also because the more of us who do this, the louder and more unified our voices become. There is real wisdom from the LGBTQAI plus community on being a proud and unified front to fight stigma. I and everyone else in the disability community, we're not weak or broken, and that should be understood. We carry strength and wisdom in our body minds, and we hold that wisdom with power. To be whole humans, the goal is not to actually enter into this ambiguous realm of normal. To be whole humans, we are to be valued for knowing and trusting our body minds and how they will allow us to participate in society. The first principle of disability justice is intersectionality. If you're not familiar with intersectionality, it was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to describe how our overlapping identities can create interlocking systems of discrimination. I have led an intersectional life, and the clearest example that I can paint for this for you is something that happens regularly when I go out in public, and it's happened since childhood. My whole life, strangers have been more than comfortable coming up to me in public spaces to ask me questions. I can usually see it from a mile away. So I started playing this game called Race or Face. It's where I get to guess whether the question of the day is going to be, where are you from? Or what happened to your face? And look, I understand that most people are well-meaning and kind and just don't know how offensive these questions are. But I want you to recognize that this is a direct result of the systems that are in place in our society, that normal looks like white, straight, cisgendered, neurotypical, and non-disabled. And while these interactions can maybe be written off as unintentional ignorance, there's a bigger picture here, because these microaggressions are rampant amongst people who are sick and disabled, especially queer, trans, BIPOC. Microaggressions are the result of larger aggressions, and they show up as a much more complex problem in our society, or many problems. And Katie is going to be talking a lot about this later. For me personally, discrimination shows up a lot with my work as a circus artist. For instance, when I was performing with circuses, I lost an entire tour, a year's worth of work, because the boss was afraid what audiences would think during meet and greet after the show. I was able to find other work, but I was lucky to have a solid social network to help me do that. And for the wider community, this is a problem because many do not have these networks in place, because disabled people are usually socially isolated, or many times socially isolated. And this oppression shows up big in our justice system, our lack of adequate healthcare, our lack of access to safe spaces. With intersectionality, it is also important to know how privilege and oppression shift depending on the situation. So in some spaces, usually in situations where people believe that Asians are the model minority, which is a white supremacist myth, by the way, my Japanese American identity has the opportunity to give me more privilege. In others, let's say amongst people who have bought into the rhetoric of the China virus, I will be at high risk. And in all of these spaces, my neurodivergence, face, and queerness are always factored into the equation. Though I should note that I am often straight passing because my spouse is a straight cisgendered man, and I rarely face discrimination because of my sexuality. Also because my family rocks and they were super supportive of my coming out, which I also acknowledge is not the case for many in our community. I'd like to open up an internal dialogue inside each of you before handing this over to Katie. I'd like you to examine what your current perceptions of sickness and disability are, and where do these perceptions come from, especially when it comes to queer, trans, BIPOC bodies. Are your beliefs shaped by your families, your faith communities, if you participated in those, the media that you consume? I would encourage you to be aware of what your gut reaction is every time you encounter someone who is disabled. What assumptions do you make? If you hear someone with slurred speech, do you assume incompetence? If you see someone using a mobility device, do you say, wow, that's really inspiring? If you see someone with a facial or physical difference, is your first reaction fear? These tropes don't come from nowhere, and yes, all of them are damaging. They are rampant in our movies, our television shows, and books. Disability, especially body disfigurement, are often shortcuts Hollywood uses to show evil or incompetence. Examples are The Witches, just from last year, everyone. Scar from The Lion King, Captain Hook, just to name a few, Freddy Krueger. Body horror is a real genre, and I'm just going to say, yeah, it has to go, right? Violence against people with disabilities is already extremely high. If we are not being portrayed as villains or as tragedies, we are used as inspiration porn, usually leading to two-dimensional characters who only exist to help able-bodied main characters reach their goal. The first step is understanding where our beliefs emerge. And the next step is to change the narrative. I will leave you with this. The fifth principle of disability justice is recognizing wholeness. It reads, each person is full of history and life experience. Each person has an internal experience composed of their own thoughts, sensations, emotions, fantasies, perceptions, and idiosyncrasies. Disabled people are whole people. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Sora. Can you leave this slide on for a second before you change it? So my name is Katie Tastrom, and I will describe myself and what you can see in the camera. I have faded shoulder length, dyed red hair. I'm a pale, small fat white femme in a hotel room, generic looking behind me hotel room. I'm wearing a pink dress, a black pink dress, which you can kind of see from my shoulders up. So I want to talk about like what Sora was talking about disability justice. I'm going to kind of go macro and then go back to Sora's, tie it back into Sora's story and experience as well. And I really appreciate that Sora shared that, because it shows a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about, where I'm going to be talking about kind of different structures and the ways that those affect disabled queers. Now I'm using the term queers to just to make it easier, as a shorthand to mean LGBTQIA two-spirit, just anyone non-binary, gender non-conforming, just as an umbrella term for different things. You know, some of these can be parsed out further in different scenarios, but just for the if I know the specifics, I might be referring to specific communities, but I will be using that as a shorthand. So one of the things, so in terms of disability justice, I think recognizing wholeness is a very interesting part of disability justice, because basically all it's doing is asking people to see us as whole people. That's really all it's doing. And it's so important. And that's why it's so important. And it's saying so much about what it's like being disabled, that one of the 10 things, of the 10 most important things that as disabled people, like we kind of, you know, say we need for justice, just being seen as people is one of them. So I just want to highlight that. I just think that's really interesting. Oh, I think, sorry, you can go on to the next slide. So I want to just talk about the intersection of queer and disabled identities. I have done PowerPoints before, but I'm very bad at them. So this just helps keep me on track with my ADHD. So it's great. Sora talked about intersectionality. So yeah, and jumping off, so actually we can move on to the next slide, because I think a lot of that was covered. So I want to talk about some of the challenges of living in the intersections and how and why that happens. And then a little bit later, I'll talk about how to make things better, so it's not all just doom and gloom. But these identities are not just about what you call yourself. These identities have real impacts, material, real world impacts on people's lives. They're disabled people and queer people, especially trans and gender nonconforming people, especially Black and Indigenous people in the US, are imprisoned at much higher rates. I'm currently working on a book about abolition and disability justice, and we don't have in terms of like how the percentage of people in prison that are disabled, we don't have great numbers, because we don't have great definitions. What definition are we going to use? What, you know, all these things. And I don't think numbers are necessarily the most important part. We know that it's like incredibly disproportionate. And if someone isn't disabled by the time they are imprisoned, a lot of times jails and prisons are disabling environments themselves. And this also includes places like coercive mental health treatment, inpatient facilities, other places like that as well. Basically that's what you're talking about in there is disabled people. And once again, disproportionate rates of queer people, especially queer and trans people in that are locked up in psych wards, mental health facilities, basically every kind of institution. So if you're living at both of those, like Sora was saying, and like Kimberly Crenshaw pointed out in terms of the way the laws work, and a lot of different amazing Black feminists have talked about that it's not just like 1 + 1 = 2, it's like 1 + 1 = 5. Like the way these identities add up, it's not addition, it's more like multiplication. Because what happens is, once you lose access to one thing, once you become somewhat marginalized, you get pushed further and further to the margins. So not only are queer disabled people more likely to be in prison once in there, we're put in isolation a lot of times, supposedly for our own safety, even though, a lot of places and a lot of mental health specialists consider isolation torture. And of course, and it is known to make mental health episodes worse, obviously, to be put in a room with nothing if you're having a mental health issue. And so what happens is, and then people end up being kept longer as well because their mental health just deteriorates. And so it's just kind of a cycle, but more like a spiral because things keep getting worse and worse for people. A lot of these places aren't accessible. I don't think the goal is to make them accessible. I think the goal is to get rid of all of these places. So I don't want to spend too long on that part. I think Sora is going to talk about accessibility, which is very important, but we want access to the things we want access to, not to prisons. So one of the important things too, in a lot of these places, the medical care is terrible. So once again, they're disabling places. If someone isn't disabled before they get to these places, the trauma, a lot of times they will be disabled by the time they leave. And there's nothing wrong with disability in itself, obviously, like Sora was saying, but obviously there is something wrong with torturing and traumatizing people. So there's some of these reasons for these numbers and this disproportionate, and all these kind of go together, right? Someone, unemployment obviously is connected to jail and prison, which is also connected to homelessness, which I'll talk about, which is, we'll talk about the way there's all these systems. I'm going to talk about a few of them real quick, but obviously they all kind of interlink with each other and play off each other and make things worse for people. So Sora told a great story about not being able to get a job. And I think that happens to disabled people, especially queer disabled people, all the time. A lot of times the jobs that we are able to get are either in underground economies or don't pay as well. And so, obviously, if you can't get a job and you need to figure out how to live, if you're pushed into underground economies, that's another way to easily get end up entangled in the jail and prison or probation or other carceral systems. Next slide. So what disabled and LGBT, what it have higher rates of addictions? Okay, I couldn't see this little thing. So I think that's something, in terms of the queer community, I think that we all probably have heard and are familiar with this, the different rates of addictions. Once again, the way addiction in the criminal justice system, the war on drugs, all interplay with each other, ends up with, once again, queer and disabled people in prisons, jails, and other situations. Another I could go on and on. So just like, but forced intersex surgeries is another, when kids are born with what's called by doctors sometimes ambiguous genitalia, they're, because of transphobia and homophobia and because of ableism and fear of other, and a lot of what Sora was talking about with the way the media portrays kind of like disfigurement and disability, there are babies that are operated on for basically no reason still today, even though there's a growing movement to ban those surgeries. And HIV criminalization as well. We can move on in the interest of time to the next slide. I could go see this. I could go on. This is a lot about what my book is about, but you can see like targeted by the police. You're homeless. You don't have anywhere to go. You're on the street. The police arrest you for loitering or drinking a beer or something that would be totally fine if you had a place to live, or would be totally fine if you could blend in and you weren't targeted, or if you had a different skin color or different presentation or whatever. So I want to go, so now kind of, I'm talking about like macro systems, but so I'm going to zoom in a little bit to a couple of the more micro and individual things. So one of the things in terms of being a disabled queer person is a lot of times the disabled events are too straight and queer events aren't accessible. So what happens is that, and Sora, you mentioned this too, and this is something that comes up a lot for me, is the isolation. Isolation from queer community and isolation from the disability community, both because they're not either welcoming or accessible itself. And so accessibility is also one of the principles of disability justice and flows through different parts of disability justice. And now Sora is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Katie. All of this is really important work that you're doing. And highlighting the prison system is something that is really not talked about and is not acknowledged. And I think it's not on most people's radar. And the work that you're doing is, I cannot stress how impactful it is. So thank you so much. So I'm going to shift over here and start talking about some concrete ways that we can create access. After my last section, I want to follow up with just some easy ways that we can make this world more accessible for individuals. And the first thing to understand is that access starts as a mindset. Tech. As a society, we live in cycles of chronic busyness, and creating access challenges all of us to slow down and be more thoughtful. Access actually starts at the level of checking your gut reactions to disabled people, as I was saying, and removing that velvet rope that shuts many of us out in societal interactions is really important. It then continues on. So instead of seeing disabled humans as broken, look instead to the broken systems which perpetuate oppression, especially in other justice movements. Disabled people need to be held up as leaders, and that means making spaces accessible. Mia Mingus, who I mentioned before as one of the originators of the disability justice movement, created an offshoot project with two other disabled Asian American activists, Alice Wong and Sandy Ho. This project, which absolutely lights my heart on fire, is called Access is Love. And this comes from the understanding that access is not something that should be treated with a sigh of frustration and as a requirement of the law, but you should know that it is required by law. That is part of the ADA. But so sure, the law is important, but this is where we want to shift attitudes, and where disability goes beyond disability rights. We want to stop thinking of access as a requirement and move towards handling it as an act of love. It's not tokenizing disabled people by offering us a seat at the table. It's building a ramp to the room where the table exists, then removing the chair to make space for mobility devices, providing ASL interpreters, audio describers, image descriptions, creating accommodations for neurodivergent folks, and educating about disability culture from actually disabled people, to name a few. So that all probably sounds really overwhelming. And I'd like to take a step back and say, in this moment, there are things that you can do to make your spaces and communities more accessible. And these are coming straight from the Access is Love project. Also, many of these things are really simple things that you could start doing immediately. And remember, accessibility helps everyone, even able-bodied and neurotypical humans. As we age, accessibility becomes even more important. If you forgot your glasses one day and you're nearsighted, or actually farsighted, having access to a video description might help you out. Also, did you know that glasses are an accessibility device? Glasses and contacts. We can work to make accessibility as normal as these things that we use every day. I will say this, it does require commitment and mindfulness and slowing down. So if you're already doing that as an individual practice, you are already well on your way. And before I jump into it, I would like to emphasize that the importance of access in queer and other safe spaces, like Katie was saying earlier, safe spaces cannot truly be safe unless they are inclusive of everyone. So with that, I'm gonna jump into the Access is Love project. Yeah. I just wanna, Jess maybe, or Katie, can you tell me how this is showing up? Because I am seeing like videos on the side, and are you seeing the full slideshow?
Yeah, so we were seeing the full slideshow. You just removed the
I just
full
removed it.
slideshow.
Yeah, I'm gonna
because you're screen sharing, it's going to look a little bit different for you because we're going to see your screen. But what we see is the screen of the slide that says 1, prioritize information about accessibility.
Perfect.
And then we see you and Katie highlighted on the right-hand side of the image.
Great. I'm just going to collapse all of your beautiful faces so that I can actually see the screen. And here we go. So number 1 is to prioritize information about accessibility for all of your events and workplaces. And the key word here is prioritize. So that means making sure that accessibility is at the center of your events. It means looking at accessible venues with accessible bathrooms and closed parking. It means providing information on what it means to be scent-free for those who have chemical sensitivities, asthma, any other kind of breathing disabilities. It's important to designate 1 or 2 people to where this is their sole job. Their sole job is to make sure that accessibility is met. Making your website accessible, or making this accessibility information visible on your website and readily downloadable is important. You should inform your people about what access needs you are going to be meeting. This is in your office, this is at your events, it's not just events. I always speak in events because that's where my brain goes, that's what I'm trained to do. But you know, in your community spaces, everyone who is on staff should know, and volunteers should know what the access needs being met are so that they can answer questions about it. And as allies, or as other disabled people who want to further this movement, encourage non-accessible venues to become accessible. So if you find something that is not accessible, you can gently nudge them to take small steps in creating greater accessibility. If you can't find an accessible space for your event, that happens sometimes. The best thing to do is to be transparent and accountable. And this actually helps out disabled people because it will save us time and perhaps unnecessary, like from spending unnecessary resources to get us there and then find out that we can't get in. So please do that, and just make that also visible on all of your materials. Number 2, have you come across a cool or random event, right? Ask organizers to include and or advertise accessibility information. This is small, but it means a lot, and it can manifest in the form of a tweet or a call or an email or, you know, a comment on the post. It just has to be something small, right? Just ask, what are the accommodations for this event? Number 3, and this is, you know, again, a tenet of the disability justice movement, value disabled expertise. So you personally, I am speaking to all of you on this call, you know more disabled people than you think you do. And so knowing that, valuing disabled expertise is key to creating accessibility. Directly from the website, recruit and retain disabled people as part of your organization and leadership. If you have the means, hire consultants who are disabled. Read disabled people's writing. There is a lot of disabled literature out there. And there's actually, Word Gathering is a local disability literature press. I encourage you to read that journal. And also support disabled art and activism. Include image descriptions and alt text on your social media posts. I love this. This is totally doable. It just requires slowing down just a little bit. So we live in an increasingly visual world, and that is both good and also offers up new challenges. So from the website, when we are denied access to information, we are denied access to community connection, to being a part of the conversation, to power. Many of us experience this in different ways: disability, class, race, language, gender, etc. It is crucial to at least try to add a small description of whatever you're posting on social media. If you're posting a picture, and it doesn't have to be long, it can be very in-depth. So there's the alt text, and it is different for every platform, but there is always an option to edit alt text. But really, if you're going to do one thing, just put it in the not comments, but the description of the photo or the caption. That's the word. Yeah. Also, I am in a lot of writing groups. Writers, this is a great challenge. This is something that you could do to challenge your writing daily, to hone in on your descriptive skills. And, you know, it's a fun challenge, but also do it because of love. This is another super easy one. Number 6, camel case hashtags. This is where you capitalize the first letter of every word, because screen readers will turn all of that into gibberish if you don't capitalize that first letter. And is something that I didn't realize. This is something that I am fairly new to coming upon. I did not know about camel case, but it is so easy, and it takes no more time than usual. Number 7, pronouns and access check-ins. I love this. Okay, so for pronouns, especially in Zoom meetings, what you can do is you can edit your name. And for some reason on my Zoom, I have it in my name, like in the profile, but it always erases my pronoun. So I always have to like go back and edit it. But it's really easy to edit your name. You just click on those 3 little dots and it'll say edit name. And then you can put in your pronouns. And what that does is when you put your pronouns in, it makes it a safe space for others to give you their pronouns. So also when we are back gathering live, which is starting to happen, it's always important to offer and ask for pronouns during introductions. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Access check-ins. I love this. Access needs to be at the top of any meeting or dropped anonymously, like in a box. So access check-ins is just asking people, what do you need, right? It is like the purest form of love that you can offer up. So, in some communities, they ask for access check-ins, as a public forum. But there are other ways to do it via private conversation and or, a box with little cards that you could drop in. Number 8, use content notices for posts that may be emotionally taxing, triggering, harmful, there were triggering there, sorry, or traumatizing. Putting a CN at the beginning, content notification at the beginning of your post so people can assess for themselves if they want to read/view it then or come back to it at a better time is a great practice of accessibility, consent, and care. So these come in the forms of content warnings, trigger warnings, and content notifications. And examples can be content notification, ableism and medicalized violence, white supremacist violence and deportation, talk of suicide, domestic violence, and addiction. And this is really important because we want to care for everyone's mental health, and we want to make sure that people feel safe and protected when they're scrolling through our various news feeds, because we are bombarded so much these days. We're inundated with violence and sad things and injustices. And sometimes we have to take a step back and know what we're getting into before we dive in. Number 9, encourage your people. So part of this work is telling others about it. So all of you here now have this knowledge. And what is beautiful is that now you can step out into the world and tell others about how to make spaces more accessible. And so encourage your family, your friends, your relatives to expand accessibility in the ways that they are able to. Another quote from Access is Love: if you have a favorite Instagram account, but they don't include image descriptions, message them about it. If you watch a great video online, but it's not captioned, contact the people or group who made it. Share this website with people, and we will share these websites with all of you later as a separate email, I believe. We'll send a bunch of resources. Share this website with people as one place to start. Visit our reading and resources page and take some time to learn about accessibility. And 10, we need to expand what access means. Access intimacy is a really beautiful concept. I believe Mia Mingus has written about it. I believe that she is the originator of it. Katie, can you confirm that? I don't hear you. Sorry.
That's my understanding. Sorry.
That's your understanding.
Yeah.
So access intimacy, we have intimacy with each other in many different ways: physical intimacy, political intimacy, friendship intimacy, right? Access intimacy is the kind of intimacy that feels truly safe to share what your access needs are and also hear access needs of others. And this is just truly such a beautiful, loving concept. I just love this, and we can include a link to Mia Mingus's post about this. She writes about it so well. Accessibility also goes beyond just disability. There are many disabled people who are also queer, trans, non-binary, Indigenous, Black, people of color, poor and working class, parents, immigrants, and more. We want to expand what our understanding of what access means and think about how we can create spaces in a world where all kinds of accessibility are centered and valued. And here's just a short list from the website. So beyond disability access, having sliding scales for fees, online options for participation, flexible time and pace of activities, venues that are close to public transportation, childcare, sensory support room, gender neutral bathrooms, no flash photography, being mindful of police and security presence, food, multilingual spaces, accessible seating, acknowledging Native communities and the land upon which we are on, and respecting different spiritual and religious practices. And so There's a website here, Access is Love. It's on the Disability Intersectionality Summit website, which I am so excited to announce that is going on right now. The opening night, the Disability Intersectionality Summit happened 2 nights ago. It didn't happen. The opening night was two nights ago. And they're going to be doing these online events through the month of December, I believe. The opening night was so joyful. Deafys in Drag performed and they were amazing. And I have a new obsession. They're amazing. It's a drag duo and they were brilliant. So please check out the Disability Intersectionality Summit and all of the amazing events that are coming up. I am not a sponsor of them. I am not being paid to say this. I just really love and believe in them. So that is it for me. And I'm going to stop sharing screen.
I'll just kind of close up and kind of tie some and kind of piggyback off of a little bit of what Sora was saying. This will just take about 2 minutes, and then if there's time for questions. So accessibility, I'm so happy that Sora, that we spent a lot of time on accessibility, because accessibility is so important, but accessibility is also just the beginning. Accessibility is necessary, but not sufficient. Accessibility just gets us in the room to be part of those conversations. It doesn't, and disability justice is about more than just representation. It's about more than us being in the room. It's about the revolutionary changes that we can make and that we will make when we are in the room and when we're able to participate meaningfully in these processes. I really liked what Sora's slide about listening to disabled leadership. That's another, as Sora mentioned, another principle of disability justice. And and there's so many disabled people that know so much about so many things. I'm constantly learning, and there's constantly new things. And there's also disabled people and queer disabled people in history to learn from. Just, tying back to like Pride, like Marsha P. Johnson, for example, is, queer disabled person. And so these are things we know, these are people we know, these are things we're familiar with. We don't necessarily just always think of it in these terms. And let me see, sorry, I'm just checking my little notes that I took when Sora was talking. So what Sora was saying, so I do some disability consulting, and so I'll kind of leave it with like the accessibility as a mindset part that goes along. The number one thing I tell to people when I'm doing consulting around accessibility is to just try to say yes to people when they ask for stuff as much as possible. Like, try to lean it, like try to just go with yes instead of no. I tell the story that, there's someone who I don't actually think is on here, but someone, the Pride here in Syracuse, the Pride used to not let people in with their own food. And, there's some people with allergies, some people that have medical reasons for needing their own food. And so, ask for that as accommodation. I need this, can I bring this in? And they're just like, no, just kind of those things. Where it's like, who cares? So instead, these people left. They were going to spend money on these vendors and all this other stuff. And instead of being able to do that, they left. Which obviously the money isn't the important part, but these are just these small ways. Just if you have a mindset that kind of is towards yes and towards listening to disabled people's needs and just seeing what you can do. A lot of times it really takes like nothing from you just to say, okay, or just a small thing. And I think that's really important. So I will, I guess, are there questions? I don't know, Jess, I will hand it back to you.
All right. Thanks so much, both to you, Katie and Sora. What a generous, beautiful, informative evening. I just want to Thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us, for weaving it together in such an accessible way, and for doing it in a way that is exciting and inspirational. So I just wanted to reflect that back to both of you. I want to also just say two things. The first one is that last week we actually had a really wonderful conversation with some folks from CNY Pride and from Black Q's Pride who talked about how they work together to really undo some of the problematics specifically around race, around CNY Pride and Juneteenth happening at the same time. So there's been incredible work done with a change in leadership with CNY Pride through the activism of Black Q's Pride organizers. So I just want to give a special shout out to them. And if you're not following Black Q's Pride on social media, please do. There is a cookout that is going to be happening on the 26th. And they are also doing a fundraiser for that. So if you'd like to contribute with your time or treasure, please let me know. And we also just hope to see you there. And we're happy to share that the Y is actually going to be offering some childcare services for that cookout. So that's pretty exciting.
Can I just say that CNY Pride now, the current people with CNY Pride have been wonderful about access and like came to me and asking about stuff. So like they've been, I just want to make clear that this was in the past.
Great. Thank you so much for saying that, Katie. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that's been so moving for me actually about facilitating some of these conversations is to highlight the intersections within our community, you know, and to be like full disclaimer here around how I know both Sora and Katie is I first really kind of got to know Katie because I was organizing these feminist punk shows in this venue that was totally not accessible like a million years ago. And Katie reached out to me and was like, hey, like, is this accessible? And I was like, no, and I don't know how to do it. Like, I don't have a budget. And Katie was like, let's just talk about it, you know, like make sure that everything that you put out about this is communicating so that people can make their own decisions. And that was such a sea change in my own thinking that really got me to think not only about how to communicate around being accessible, but how to make my events more accessible and also owning my own disability, you know, which is something that I did not do for a very long time, right? I got to know Sora better in more recent years because we were in conversations around potentially organizing like a very ambitious arts event, you know, and also I think the first time that we met, I was maybe doing a performance actually around my own experience with sexual assault and trauma.
Live with me forever.
You know, so like just, and I'm not saying that to be self-serving, but just to kind of like highlight that over the years, right, that these personal relationships can actually lead to professional opportunities where we are making change at institutional levels, right? Whether that be CNY Pride or some of the things that Sora asked me to do for this evening are things that I'm going to be bringing back so that we can be more accessible in our programming, right? So just to kind of highlight that arch. So I just wanted to thank both of you for that and also to just share the personal relationships that allow us to actually make cultural and structural change. So with that being said, I'd love to ask anybody to put their questions into the chat if you'd like to enter the conversation to ask any questions. I am going to go ahead and read some messages that have come through that Katie and Sora you can respond to. So we have a message from Toby who says, thank you to the YMCA for these amazing speaker series. I'm always here in support of my LGBTQIA friends and family. This is incredible information for everyone. So great to see you, Sora. As a retired special education teacher, I've been an advocate for many years. During my almost 35-year career, I've seen a great deal of discrimination. I currently work with an incredible production company called Front Row Players for adults of all abilities. Some of the actors are my former students. Their parents and caregivers continue to fight every day for inclusion, accessibility, equal rights, and to receive services they need. Thank you so much. We also have a comment from Michael saying that Sora is magical, that your love for community is everywhere. And also I wanted to give a special thank you, Jess, for your gratitude. And I also wanted to give a special shout out to Diane, who has been kind of like live posting resources in the chat for everybody.
Awesome. Yay, Diane.
So if you all would like to access some of those resources.
Waving and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your contribution, Diane. So if you would like to scroll through that chat and copy any of that information that is available to you right now. And as Sora mentioned, we will also be including any of the information that was provided and referenced during their presentation today. So let's see, is there anything anyone else would like to ask? Any questions, comments from the audience? Well, perhaps you have stunned us. Sora and Katie, it's a lot of information to sit with and be with, and your generosity is
I'd like
indeed
to offer this up. I'm going to drop my email in the comments. So if anybody has any questions for me personally, feel free to email me.
I'll do the same as well. And yeah, and feel free to look into more of my writing and stuff. There's a lot, but I'm open about everything. Ask me about whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely follow her website. Go to her website and dive in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Really important stuff.
So I guess we've got more gratitude coming in through the chat. And, you know, out of respect of folks' time as well, I suppose I would just like to extend an invitation to both of you, perhaps you, Katie, and then Sora to close us out. If you have any final thoughts that you would like to send us off with this evening.
Yeah, I just want to thank Jess so much and for creating this space. I've lived in Syracuse for about 10 years now, but I'm from Canandaigua originally. So, you know, upstate New York is home to me, but I've been in Syracuse in a lot of ways. I feel because of my disabilities, I have chronic illnesses, among other things. I feel a lot of times really alienated from both like the queer community and even the disability community in Syracuse and the activist community in Syracuse, basically all of Syracuse. I think a lot of times because of my disabilities, I'm not taken as seriously because of the things I can't do in certain ways and whatever. And that's it's all fine. Well, it's not fine, but my point is, I really want to thank Jess for making this space to like make me feel included and to like help. And I'm sure with other people too, people who are watching this, just seeing that, you know what I mean? Like seeing disability, queer representation, and especially with people in our own communities and being able to make these connections. I want to thank you for that. And I want to also thank Sora so much. It has been so fun working on this with you. And thank you. And thank you everyone for being here, of course, and listening. I always have a ton to say. If you want more opinions, ask me.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. I don't know how to follow that. I am just so grateful. I'm grateful for this community. Jess, I'm grateful for you, dude. Thank you so much for bringing me onto this. For everyone who is in this space, if you are looking for community in the disability community, I am opening that up to the universe. We are trying, there's a few of us here who are trying to like gather the community and just live with each other, you know, just like live and be with each other and celebrate each other. So if that sounds like something that you would like to be a part of, either as an ally or as a disabled person yourself, please reach out to me. And yes, just thank you all for being here. So much gratitude.
I'll echo that gratitude. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everybody. It looks like I double posted it. Let me try one more time. I put another link to the rest of the Pride programming in the comments. And I also just wanted to say that I think in this moment where we are approaching a reentry, right? We are approaching a reentry into society following an incredibly deadly, right? Life-changing, world-altering pandemic. And I think that the disability community, right, as well as the queer community, have an incredible amount of wisdom and leadership that we must look to understand how we are going to co-create a world in which we can all be safer, emerging from a time where we have been afraid of each other, afraid of death, right, and afraid of what it means to interact with one another. So I just kind of wanted to close with that and say that I'm so grateful that both of you agreed to participate in this, because I think that this is such a beautiful example of the local wisdom and expertise that we have that can help to guide what that looks like on both a local and a national level. And I'm gonna like start crying. I'm a very sentimental person when it comes to this stuff. But I just wanted to say that like I really do believe that there is so much that we can learn from each other, particularly this communities, as we begin to imagine how we interact with one another again. And I have great faith and hope because of my connection to both of you and also to the work of these communities, thinkers, and you know, luminaries that have existed so much far beyond and before us. So so many whom you highlighted today. So before I start totally breaking down and crying, I think I'm just going to say that I wish everyone a really beautiful evening. I can see that we've got a few more comments coming into the chat, which you guys can please take a look at. And please join us again next Monday. We have a lot of activities, things that are going to be happening the week of the 21st. So if you have any questions around that, please let me know. We've got some trainings, we've got more activities. And yeah, we'll have a great time celebrating each other and being together, whether it be in person and virtually. Oh yeah, that was the one last thing I wanted to say, was that even though we are kind of like returning to kind of like more of an in-person physical world, virtual has always been here and it will always be here. And I think that activist communities, especially those of us that face barriers to being in the same place and time to each other, have understood this for a very long time. So I also just want to say that, like, I think the wisdoms of using either online or hybrid communities can really help to metabolize what it is that we want our world to be.
Yes.
So, right? Because I also both know you through online, right? Even though we also know each other in person. So with that being said, I want to wish all of you a really beautiful night. Thank you for your participation in your community. And I look forward to seeing you all, whether it be online or in person sometime soon. So good night.